They call us cold-hearted monsters. How could we not be? Our culture has been carved from the frozen north. Those who seek comfort do not last. Hard winters force us to fight for survival. And in that biting reality, we have embraced the savagery of the wolf, the brutality of the bear. The hard wood frames our houses, our ships, our axes and shields. As the trees of the forest stand together to bear the brunt of a blizzard, so does the Sturgian shield wall stand to break our foes. These are tumultuous times, but we have always thrived in harshness. It is time for a new great chieftain to rise up and unite the North. We must do whatever it takes to ensure our people's survival. Barons must be broken. Khans must cower. And empires must be crushed. All shall fall to the might of Sturgia. Welcome to the lands of Chieftain Bokii and the Shieldbreakers. I've got an exciting playthrough for you all looking for some of that sweet Sturgian shield wall action. Well, here we go. This entire playthrough focuses around Sturgian heavy axemen. This is such a badass unit, and when you stack them in groups of 300 plus, they become even more badass. First thing is, they're just super tanky because look at this armor. 50 armor, 48 head armor, good hand armor, good leg armor. I mean, this is an armored dude right here. He's a little tank. On top of that, he's got a badass shield. And what's great about these big shields is, yes, you can tighten them into a shield wall and really make things airtight, but honestly, you can advance in line formation and they're still going to block most of the arrows coming in just because these shields are so massive. But you put them in shield wall and they overlap and stuff. I mean, it's just airtight. Nothing can penetrate. On top of the awesome armor and awesome shield, they have the veteran warrior's axe. And remember, axe damage is kind of between swords and maces. So swords have a ton of damage, but they don't penetrate armor so well. Maces don't have as much flat damage, but they penetrate armor amazingly. Axes are kind of in between. So these guys do very well against other infantry. Legionnaires and things that have maces are obviously a little more set up to succeed against armor, but that axe makes them good, not great, against both types of lightly armored troops and armored troops. So the axe is a nice addition. And then the best part about this, and this is where the shield breaking comes in, they have this Raider's throwing axe. And these throwing axes by themselves aren't that great. But here's the deal. They have, three? It says they have 3 here, plus you get some perks in the throwing tree to give your troops more. So each of these guys has somewhere between 6 to 10 throwing axes each. You multiply that times about 300 troops and start doing the math. You can imagine what that looks like while you're advancing towards the enemy. It's awesome. I mean, these guys are just slinging these things nonstop. The enemy's shields are getting busted up. The ones that get through are softening up the enemies. And then you charge in and they're all weakened up and your guys just get to work. And it's the Sturgian way and it's so badass. I mean, just so badass. There are some other units I think that can spice up your shield wall a little bit and still play into that shield breaker theme. The first one here, of course, is the line breaker. The interesting thing about the line breaker is that they give this guy a one-hander instead of 2 stacks of throwing axes, like the heavy axeman. I wish someone would come in and edit this because they don't need a one-hander. You bring these guys for their two-handed. I mean, they have 150 and two-handed skill. They don't need a one-hander. That's what you're bringing them for, to get that 150 two-handed and put it on this drilled axe and start bringing things down. They don't have a ton of armor. It's okay, but it's not great. But I just feel like they should have 2 stacks of throwing axes. I don't have a ton of them. You'll see in my 384-man army, I don't even have 40 of them because I really want that solid shield wall, just that massive group of heavily armored dudes with shields. I mean, it's just completely impenetrable, and it's so much fun. And these guys are very susceptible to range damage. It's not so bad when you fight factions where you can face your shield wall, but anything that has flanking units or things that get behind you and shoot, like horse archers, these guys are very susceptible to that kind of fire. So I don't like to have a ton of them, but having a few in the back, and they tuck in pretty nicely there in the back while you advance. And then when the cavalry comes through, these guys are a nice little goalie there in the back of the formation to kind of give that cavalry a red light. Very good at taking down cav. Another unit for your consideration, the Scolder mercenaries. They go all the way up to this Rhoda. This is an interesting unit because they have thrown weapons, these javelins, which have 101 pierce. That is awesome. Now, obviously, they don't carry as many of these as the throwing axes, but as long as you're throwing something, I'm happy. They also have a drilled two-handed axe that the Linebreaker has. However, where the Linebreaker has 150 two-handed, these guys only have 60. So they're not nearly as good with it. Another thing that sucks about these guys is their armor is terrible. Now, their head armor is fantastic and their shield is great, so I shouldn't say their armor is terrible, but the rest of it's pretty weak, and if anything gets through that shield or cavalry comes lancing them, they drop pretty quick. I have 11 of them just because I've picked them up from Empire armies that I've crushed, and I was just replacing casualties I incurred while I was behind enemy lines. But once I get back to Sturgian lands, I would drop all these guys off, and I'd just recruit some more axemen. One of my favorite units to include, and one I've leaned on heavily this playthrough, has been the Sea Raiders. Every time you fight a group or you clear a camp, which you kind of have to do anyway to keep them from messing up your economy, you can get a group of these guys. And you can always level them up to chief. Now, I never took them up to the Druzhanic champions because I didn't use any cavalry. This was a full shield wall army from me. No range, no cavalry. And so people are like, well, you're only taking them to tier 4. Well, that doesn't sound that great. Well, here's the deal. First off, you can get these guys everywhere, which means when you're behind enemy lines, like in Valandian towns or out in the Britannia area, or even in certain parts of the Empire, you're out raiding and roughing stuff up, and you need to get some replacements without going to Sturgian land. That's what these guys are for. They're great fill-ins. On top of that, look here at these stats. Throwing 120, but look at that one-handed. 160 and one-handed with that axe that we talked about, the benefit of having that axe. Look at your heavy axeman here. His one hand is 130. So this guy's at 160. And then you come into the one-handed tree with wrapped handles, and you make yourself the captain of your infantry with my Sturgia build. We'll get to it here in a sec. I'll walk you through how I built this guy. But look at this. Adds plus 30 one-handed skill to infantry troops in your formation. On top of that, you can come into the roguery tree and grab this one of the family, and look at that. Plus 10 to vigor and control skills. Well, here's vigor skills, one-handed. So they'd get another plus 10 to one-handed. So 30 plus 10, that's 40. And so now that 160 one-handed is 200 one-handed. And so now you've got an entire army full of one-handed machines with some of the best one-handed weapons in the game. And what's really nice about these axes is that they're actually not very long. If you look at the length on these things, 62, that sounds like a disadvantage, but the kind of fighting that the shield wall kind of forces upon the enemy, where everything's up close, if you've got a really long weapon, you're not going to have a lot of success. These little close range weapons like this do very well in that shield-to-shield combat that you kind of force upon everybody you fight. Super fast, a lot of damage, and they just work their way through your enemies in no time. And so those are the 3 troops that my army mostly consisted of. The Heavy Axeman, the Linebreaker, and the Sea Raider Chief. And I don't know what it is about these Sea Raider Chiefs. They just live. At one point, I had like 70 or 80 in my army because they were just not dying. And with that 200 one-handed, they do a great job. But ultimately, when I get back to Sturgian lands, I tend to dump a lot of them off, and I get back to recruiting more axemen. I would just suggest making about 3/4 of your army axemen, and then sprinkle in these as you need to. Another great unit for this playthrough is Lake Rats when you can get them. I had some, but they died, unfortunately. I mean, they come with double hook javelins, 117 pierce. amazing shield, and a badass battle axe. These guys are fantastic. They even got a little better army than the chieftains. Whenever you can get these guys, I love to keep them in my shield wall. And here's the chieftain of the Shieldbreakers, Bokii. And he is just such a man. Look at him. Isn't that badass? I've got some pretty good gear here. I got this lordly large round shield. Look at that, 610 health points. And then I've got some lordly and legendary items here. So he is just armored to the teeth. These are legendary weapons because I have smithing, and then I've got the fun sticks. This is my favorite flag to use by a mile because you just spend so much time in this playthrough closing with the enemy in shield wall or line formation. So there's a lot of running involved, and this gives all your axemen some nitrous. I found this at a tournament where there was about 16 lords. So if you ever see a bunch of lords stacking a keep and there's a tournament going on, that's how I found this, and it was a hell of a win. And this guy has no problem winning tournaments because I'll show you the build here. You'll see we've got completely maxed out one-handed and two-handed. I'd like to have the option. Sometimes I carry double throwing axes and a one-hander, like in a siege situation. But as the game's gone on, I really like having the option to switch. There's just that cleave damage. And the length on the two-hander when it comes to bringing down cavalry is just hard to beat. However, when you're advancing on archers or you're in that siege situation where you're fighting multiple opponents at once, having that shield is really nice. So it's nice to be able to switch to what you need. I won't run through all the perks here. I just want to point out a few things. When it comes to throwing, the fastest way to level it is to drop rocks on top of guys in a siege. And another way you can do it is you can just throw the catapult ammunition either over the castle wall, or you can carry it into the drop hole over the gate and just drop it down on top. So if you run out of the rocks, they tend to go pretty quick. Then just go grab yourself some catapult ammunition and start throwing that down there. But that is absolutely the fastest way to level your throwing. I always suggest when you're leveling throwing, start with javelins, because the axes really don't take off until you get here with splinters, where you're doing that triple damage against shields with throwing axes. And then this also gives all of your axe throwers plus 50% damage to shields with throwing weapons. And this is one of the key talents of this playthrough. You have to have this talent. You could still use javelins and maintain the Shieldbreaker theme for your own personal champion if you want to play it that way, because this also have this javelins can penetrate shields talent. So if you want to use javelins on your guy, then you could always come grab this. But if you're going to use throwing axes, come down here and grab weak spot, because that 30% armor pin on your axes is very nice, and plus 10% to your entire army. And you've seen I have about 400 guys all throwing weapons. This extra damage adds up over time. But no matter what you decide, javelins or throwing axes, you want splinters because of that extra damage to shields from throwing weapons by everyone in your formation, which will be you. You'll be the captain of your formation. There's a bunch of perks in here to buff up two-handed and experience and one-handed skill and, larger shield protection area. This is great. So there's a bunch of skills that can just make your guy the most badass infantry captain ever. And I really like that in this playthrough, just buffing up my already tanky badass units. Of course, you're going to want that high athletics. I did go ahead and level smithing just because I wanted legendary weapons. But once I crafted all the legendary weapons I needed, I just put all my smithing stuff in storage and I quit doing it. And I quit doing it at like 3 million gold. And you can see I'm just making money hand over fist. I've got all the nobles I need. I've got all the companions. I got money. My fiefs are just crushing. What am I at? I mean, I'm just making 3K a day with my own personal 800-man army. So I don't need to do smithing anymore, and it just slows the game down so much. But I did want the legendary axes, so I did do some smithing. What I really like about roguery in this playthrough in particular is this partners in crime. And how it works is, like, I just come up on this bandit party. See, I've got 34 guys right here. I want you to surrender. And he'll say, I'll be honest, we don't want to die. And you can just see very well join us. And they're always going to offer to join you. And so what happens is I can just grab a stack of these guys. And of course, the other option is if I know I'm going to come down into the Empire lands and raid and destroy all this, but I'm going to take some casualties, I could just clear this bandit hideout and carry these sea raiders with me as prisoners And you also get some bonus to recruiting bandit prisoners. So it's like I just have these replacements coming in. And like I said, those Sea Raider chiefs with the 201 hand can be incredible additions to your army. If you get to where you have too many or whatever, once there's peacetime, you come back here and you recruit some more recruits and start leveling them up. But these guys are excellent fill-ins. And every once in a while, you get that bandit boss, and he's a bad boy. I had a few. They've died in service, but I've had a few. And so Sea Raiders, being the wonderful addition to this playthrough that they are, grabbing some perks and roguery makes it even better. Like this one, Two-Faced. You don't suffer any morale loss for converting bandit prisoners. That's nice. And I already showed you partners in crime and one of the family. These three make it awesome. And then you're just making more money and less chance for hero prisoners to escape in your party. And then I just threw the rest in charm, leadership, and engineering and tactics. Tactics was the last one I filled up. I just really don't need any of these. So they would have been worthless. I have a steward. I have a medic. And so it was just, there was no need for me to grab any of this stuff. I could have done trade, but there was no reason. This minus 20% chance from siege bombardments is a nice addition, especially if your medic also has this siege medic perk. That one plus the engineering perk really gives your army some resilience to those nasty sieges. Now, the key thing to making this whole campaign pop is the addition of one mod. And I hate to do this to my console family, but it is just what it is. And mods are just amazing. And the mod is Party AI Controls. And so when I hit Control P, it brings up all the parties in my entire faction. These are my people. I have a third, but I think they got captured. You'll see that in their armies are 100% infantry. No archers, no cavalry, no horse archers, just running that 100% infantry. And if you come into their template, you'll see I gave them this template that I created called the Great Axe, which means this is 168 heavy axemen. That's the only units they will recruit and level up is axemen. So when I bring my giant army together, not only do I have an army full of axemen, but all my companions have an army full of axemen. And you can also give them orders on what to patrol. Over here in options, you can keep them from joining other armies or besieging or raiding. All these guys do is they go around and recruit axemen, and they wait for my call. And then when I need to, I can summon a giant 700, 800 man axeman army. And you'll see in the combat footage at the end of this video what it looks like when 800 axemen start throwing all their axes out. It is mwah, chef's kiss. It is so much fun. You've got to try this playthrough. But if you're on PC and you have the opportunity, this makes the playthrough all the more fun. Party AI is controlled by Carbon, one of my favorite modders. If I ever get a hold of him, he's going in my basement and he's never coming out until he makes every mod I could ever think of. He's incredible. Give him a thumbs up. Tell him you appreciate his work in the comments. We want to keep him around. Party AI Controls will help you create armies full of whatever units you want. Just make sure when you come into Party Controls, you give them a troop template. You can give them orders and everything. But the big thing to do is come into options and make sure they can't join armies. Otherwise, other lords will just constantly recruit them into armies and they'll just get captured and crushed over and over. Many have asked how I approach a campaign. Immersion is all. For too long, you have allowed the weak to influence you. Cowards telling you to sit behind your shields until the enemy runs out of arrows and all that other weak shit. To the true Sturgian, the thumping of arrows and bolts into our shields are the drums of war, and they incite our bloodlust. The sisters have already woven your fate, my brothers. Now is the time to claim the glory you are destined for. Grab your axe, raise your shields, and march with me, sons of Sturgia. It is time for our foes to witness our strength.